My name is Griffin, and I'm really excited to have you today. What we're going to talk about is really a magnificent piece of artwork, so I would call it, is the early American spinning wheel, which played an enormous role in shaping early America and life in early America. If you see it, you might just think, oh, it's a wooden wheel. Cool, but that's fair, but the spinning wheel is one of those artifacts that becomes way more interesting once you understand its story, where it came from, how it works, and how it shaped the lives of everyday people in early America. Let's start at the beginning. Humans have always needed clothing, and long before machines, long before any kind of electricity, people had to make yarn entirely by hand. That meant taking fibers like wool, cotton, or flax, pulling them apart, and twisting them together to make their own yarn. Imagine trying to make enough thread for a shirt or a blanket by hand. It would be slow, really slow. Then came the spinning wheel. The earliest spinning wheel appeared in India sometime between 500 and 1000 AD. These early wheels were simple compared to designs such as these, but they were revolutionary at the time. The invention spread west across Asia into Europe, and by the late Middle Ages into the 1100s and 1300s, the spinning wheels were becoming a vital tool in European workshops and houses. When Europeans arrived in North America in the 1600s, they brought the spinning wheel with them. And in the American colonies, this tool became absolutely essential for life in early America. Families relied heavily on clothing, so there weren't stores on every corner where you could go in and get clothes. There weren't factories that had cheap t-shirts like there were later. If you wanted clothes, you had to make your own clothes, and this made it so much easier and faster. If you picture a typical colonial living space, there's going to be three things: a few chairs, a table, a fireplace, and always a spinning wheel. The person who spent the most time using this and why it's so important to add into a museum is women. It shows the importance of women. It shows the importance how they shaped early America. People don't always realize that spinning wasn't done alone. Women would hold these things called spinning bees, which were basically groups centered around spinning yarn where they'd get together, talk, share food, and even have a little friendly contest sometimes. It was a way to build community while still getting important work done. Now let's talk about the machine itself. Even though spinning wheels were usually made from common woods like maple, cedar, or oak, they required a skilled woodworker to build. There were a lot of moving parts that had to work smoothly to make the whole thing work. When this thing right here spins and you crank it, it twists the fibers that you put in it into thread. Before the spinning wheel, people used drop spindles, which was basically a stick with a wing on it. It worked, but it was still really slow compared to these. With the spinning wheels, production speed jumped dramatically. You can make a lot of yarn in a short amount of time. The yarn was even stronger than doing it by hand. It didn't just make life easier in the colonies, it actually helped inspire the machines that were centered around the Industrial Revolution. Textile mills based many of their ideas on how the small spinning wheel basically worked. So the simple wooden tool was one of the biggest technical revolutions in history. It also tells us a lot about society during the colonial era. Not every wheel looked the same. Families who didn't have much money owned simple, practical wheels, nothing fancy, something that worked. Wealthier families, they'd have more fancy, elaborate machines that were decorated with a lot more nicer wood, hand carved, and even this everyday object could show us how social classes worked back then. The spinning wheel reveals something important about gender roles also in early America. People who kept early households running. Women performed a lot of tasks such as cooking, cleaning, taking care of the children, and spinning was a big one too. Their labor was really essential to the family, and yet much of their work wasn't even recorded in the history books. That's why artifacts like the spinning wheel matter and need to be put in museums like this, because it reminds us the skills, the effort, the participation that women put in. If you can imagine somebody just sitting at a spinning wheel all day putting in work to get the family through the winter, it's just really amazing to think about that we don't give them credit for. Think about every thread, every piece of clothing started as loose fibers. Before cloth could be woven, before clothes could be sewn, someone had to spin those fibers, and it was 90% of the time women. we don't always think about it because it's kind of not cool, people think, or not worthy to talk about, but it really just shows how important women are. I encourage you to just like see the lives of people who used it, see the communities built around it, such as the textile mill communities, the boarding houses that they had. It's a really technological innovation that people had back then. And what makes this thing so cool is that we can really take a look into the lives of the people who used them. We can imagine the hands that used it. We can imagine the world it helped shape. We can see how good that this thing really did shape early America. And this thing is, I can't stress enough how important this was on gender roles back in the day, because people look at this thing and they just see a wood wheel, but they don't see the hours and the months and the works that were put into it by women. Usually it really just shows how important women were back in time, especially when back then women didn't have a lot of rights. They didn't have near as much rights as men, and even though they were probably just as important of making a family work, if not more, men really they worked more. They were really the pockets of the family, I guess you could say. And women took care of the children, like I mentioned before. They cleaned, cooked, spun, made clothes. They got the family through the winter. They saved a ton of money. Also, this thing right here based the design of the big textile mills. So this transitioned really into where you could walk to a store and you could buy a cheap t-shirt, cheap pants, cheap sweaters, because of this thing right here, because it eventually led into that. You could buy what you used to could make on your own. You could go into a store and buy for just as cheap as you could make it at your own house, but with other people making it. And another way women really helped is in the textile mills. It was 90% of women working in the textile mills, women and children. And they'd stay in the boarding house for months at a time, and they'd work for pennies on the dollar, and they were making clothes for U.S. citizens and just making life so much easier for everybody. And that's why this thing right here is just a massive shaper of the colonial era America, the early American of the United States. It helped build and build and build until we got to where we are today, and we're mass producing clothes. I mean, without this thing, it is just such an important advancement of technology of its time. It is so important to have this in the museum. And without this, I don't really know where we'd be at today. So I just encourage you to just take a look into it, just see how it works. I can even show you how it works. So what you do is you thread the yarn in up here, and there's usually a crank, and then you spin it, and then eventually it'll spin this material you'll put in up here, usually wool or flax. It'll spin it into yarn. And so I challenge you to just take a look at how this works and just how it really shaped early America and why it's so important to our country and to the people of our country. Take a look in the lives of the people who used it, and take a look in the lives of the people that it helped shape. Thank you for all listening to me talk about this and why it's important to be in this museum, and thank you.